So without further ado, as we run through our three inductees for the 2018 class, I'd like to ask Mr. Tim Hull to come forward and do the introduction for Miss Janet Butler.
I'm supposed to introduce my sister-in-law for this big nomination. I've known her for quite a few years. I really got to know her between 1966, 67. I was going into town, it was snowing. She was in a ditch and I had to pull her out of it. So that's one of those things. She was started kind of with a phone company with GTE up in Chicago and stuff, and then she moved to Dallas area with went to Verizon, and she was very good at Verizon and stuff. And I think it was, well, here it is. She's on the cover of Forbes magazine. So that's another plus. Then we decided to come back to Tuscola, and it's been a role since then, volunteering, being our secretary at Kiwanis, and she's just all around good sister-in-law. So here's Janet.
Well, thank you all for coming and for such a warm welcome. I am so honored and humbled to be inducted into the TCH Hall of Fame. When I look at the other people who are in the Hall of Fame, I just feel so privileged to become part of that group. I attended TCHS in what I call the olden days, because I am part of the class of 68, of which is 50 years. For those of us from that era, do you remember gas wars? We could get gasoline for like 28 cents a gallon. 4 of us would go together, put in 2 quarters each, get $2 worth of gas, and we could drive all evening. Obviously now, at that time, there was no cell phones. And I have to say, not being available and trackable 24/7 was not all bad. There was no computers, of course. There was no girls' athletics. At the time I was in school, the girls had to wear dresses or skirts. If it was really cold, we could wear pants underneath our skirts, but then we had to take them off and leave them in our locker. I can remember having to kneel when I was a freshman on the gym floor, and if our skirts didn't touch the floor, we were sent home to change, because that was just unacceptable. So many things have changed, and thank goodness for a lot of those changes. I grew up in Tuscola. My parents moved here from Charleston when I started the 1st grade. My parents were hardworking people. My dad worked out at the chemical plant, which was Petro at that time, at the very beginning. And my folks didn't have a ton of money. My mom stayed at home, but they always put the needs of my sister Sherry and I above their own needs. When I look back, I think she and my mom wore the same clothes for a long time so that we could have music lessons and other extra things that could only be afforded for the sacrifices that they gave. My dad was kind of a man ahead of his time, I thought. He always encouraged me to dream big. And if I said, oh, maybe I'll be a nurse, he'd say, oh, no, be a doctor. And he didn't want me held back my thinking or my dreaming because I was a girl. And that wasn't always the values that everybody had back 50 years ago. So I felt very, very proud of my dad for encouraging Sherry and I both for anything that we wanted to do. Our folks definitely taught us by example, and we were very privileged to be with them. I think all of us alumni can look back and remember some of the special teachers that made a positive impact on us when we were in high school. I particularly remember Mrs. Ethel Snyder. She was our history teacher, and she was a class sponsor for our class all 4 years. And Mrs. Mary Isles was my Latin teacher. They challenged me, they encouraged me, and they really made me better. So I think all of you have experienced turning points in your life or defining moments. I have to say, meeting my husband of 49 years was a huge turning point in my life. I was at the U of I, freshman in pre-med, thinking I was going to head into a medical field. I met my husband, and it was the craziest thing. We met at a Young Republicans convention in Chicago, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. Somebody back on my dorm floor backed out, and one of my dorm members talked me into going, and that is how David and I met. Well, apparently we liked each other because we got married when we finished that year of school. We didn't return to school at that time, and we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area where his folks lived. And you talk about culture shock. Let me tell you, there was a big difference in the 60s between Tuscola culture and California culture.
Still is.
And the next big thing that kind of happened to us, and it was really directly David, but I felt just as affected about it. About 2 years later, David received his draft notice. And after looking at the options, and Vietnam was hot and heavy at that time, he ended up signing up in the Army for 3 years. Went to signal school in Augusta, which I went there. My folks provided us a travel trailer so that I could be there down with him. And when his orders came, it was Thailand. And honestly, even though I kind of knew where Thailand was on a globe, but I really didn't know too much about it. But considering the orders didn't say Vietnam, I was thrilled to pieces, and I was able to go over with him. When I thought California was culture shock, oh my gosh, Thailand was a totally different experience. At that time, and I think it's still true, like 96% of their people were Buddhist. And their philosophies of life are just very, very different than ours. And it gave me such a great appreciation for being an American, for having the opportunities that we have as Americans, and it made me a better person. It was one of the best things that I think David would agree happened to both of us. It also started my interest in volunteering. All of the civilian type jobs in Thailand were provided to Thai nationals. So those of us military dependents who were over there were not able to work in any type of paying job. And I ended up volunteering a few hours a week to help young adults improve their English. And they were so much fun. And it gave me that bug of volunteering and doing something to make a positive difference in other people's lives. So we did return to Illinois. We did not return to California. We used to call it the land of the flakes and fruits and nuts. But we actually came back to Tuscola, and David finished his degree at the U of I while I worked. Uncle Sam certainly helped put David through school, and we ended up in Des Plaines, Illinois, in the Chicago area. David worked for a public accounting firm and took the train downtown. And that's where I took a job with GTE. And I did not realize at the time that that job was going to turn into a career. But I first entered GTE as literally an entry-level clerk. And after a few short months, I thought, you know, this is a really good company, and I could have a lot of opportunity here, but I'm going to have to go back to school. So I worked full-time with GTE and went back to school, earned an associate degree, then went on to a bachelor's degree, and eventually I finished a master's degree in business administration when we were in Texas. One of the things I always felt, even though I was from a small town, I really felt my education at Tuscola Community High School served me well for going on to higher education. It may have not been the fanciest school, but just the fact of being a smaller school, smaller classes, I think we all benefited from that a lot. I eventually was able to go through the ranks, become a department manager, and finally the National Accounts Operations Director. I was responsible for $750 million of revenue, over 300 employees, and several geographic locations across the United States. The good news is I had a lot of opportunities in my job to meet different people, do different things. I realized very quickly that when you manage people, you really have an opportunity to make positive impacts on their lives. I was always very careful to treat people with respect and courtesy, even if it was a difficult situation. I mean, sometimes you have to fire people. Sometimes you have to counsel them because you know they can do better. But you really have the opportunity to make a difference to people, just like teachers do with their students. Someone who manages people has that same opportunity to do positive things for their people. Back then, because that was a number of years ago, the subsidiary I was in of GTE, which became Verizon, was kind of a good old boys club. Particularly when I was promoted to director, every single meeting I went to, I would be the only woman in those meetings. So that was another thing that kind of gave me a wake-up call of what could I do to help other women be successful in our corporate environment. So I had a number of people that I had the opportunity to mentor, to help them along, to give them little tips. One of the tips I would always give them is take care of your people, take care of your customers, and have your boss's back. Now, that paid off for me in a big way when the merger between Bell Atlantic and GTE took place. We received a new vice president that we 5 directors reported to. And sure, it would have been nice to have been promoted to vice president, but the other directors were very vocal about being upset, and that person wasn't the most qualified, and this and that and the other. Well, within 1 year, I was the only former GTE director that reported to that vice president. He had weeded the other people out. So that was a tip I always told people: don't be speaking, gossiping, don't ever say anything bad about somebody else in the company, because they very well could become your boss at a later time. So I had the opportunity to work with a bunch of great people. I have a lot of attention to detail. I've been told I'm pretty organized. So I for my department, for my VP, I was kind of that go-to person if they wanted to know anything, if they wanted advice, if they wanted mentoring. So I kind of got that reputation. I was selected many times to serve on special projects or special teams. And one of the teams I served on, which was a highlight of my career, was the executive team that led the effort to win the National Malcolm Baldwin Award. And our subsidiary did win it, and the executive team was sent to Washington, D.C. There was a presentation and a reception for us, and I met George W. Bush. I was almost speechless when it came around to introduce me and shake his hand, and it was just a moment that, oh my gosh, here's a little girl from Tuscola, Illinois, meeting the President of the United States. So it was a big moment in my life. Another team I served on, which is related to the Forbes cover, is GTE decided to partner with Sterling Software. And I was selected to lead the development team on the Verizon side of it. Our joint team developed, tested, and implemented a completely new marketing, order processing, and customer service system for national accounts. The product was so successful that Sterling Software purchased an advertising cover wrap in Forbes magazine to promote the product. And it was a great partnership and just another thing that gave me the opportunity to learn more, to grow more, and that kind of thing. When the merger did take place, I was a little nervous because I still had 2 years before I completely vested my retirement at Verizon. Back in the old Bell companies, they called them your points. So I was a little nervous because there was a gentleman in Bell Atlantic that did the exact same job that I did. But as it turned out, I was the one selected to continue on with Verizon. And it was one of those watch what you ask for. I was thrilled to keep my job. I was not as thrilled when I found out that the extra 300 and some employees that I was inheriting were all union. I had worked for a subsidiary of Verizon that was non-union. So I had employees that were under 3 different union contracts. So I had a lot to learn. But I thought, hey, they're just people. And I went and visited every office, gathered about 20 to 30 people. I had each of them introduce themselves to me. I shook their hand, and I asked them to tell them something about themselves. And I, in return, told them something about me. And I think it just, again, showed respect for them because, again, they were former Bell Atlantic. I was former GTE. So I'm sure they thought that they would have rather had the Bell Atlantic person take over that responsibility instead of me. But it kind of started us on the right foot, and I was very careful to respect the position of the union reps.
Well, she does give a lot of her time. And speaking of giving, of the 750 million, is that what it was, in accounts? I think my house has given a lot of that to Verizon. Any rebates I can get might be great. Our next inductee is going to be introduced by his sister. Can I have Miss Kathy Fry come forward, please?